It is said that in the far reaches of a medieval winter, when the world seemed carved from frost and silence, a lone lantern trembled against the stones of a forgotten chapel. Its flame was small, almost fragile, as though unsure whether it belonged to the realm of the living or the hushed kingdom of the cold. Yet it burned, unwavering, even as snow pressed gently against the chapel walls and winds traced their long, mournful breaths across the monastery grounds. Outside, the night lay heavy, an ocean of white, drifting endlessly beneath a dim and distant moon. Inside, the air held a quiet older than the building itself. Dust hovered like ancient incense, stirred only by the faint quiver of heat rising from the lantern's flame. And though no voices filled the chamber now, the lingering echo of hymns, soft, wordless, half-remembered, seemed to cling to the rafters like spirits reluctant to leave. Some believe the lantern was first lit on a night when the monastery's brothers prepared for the solstice. Not the Christian holy day carved into the calendar by decree, but something deeper, quieter, an older rite woven into the bones of winter itself. In those days, villagers whispered of a night when the sun paused in its journey, hesitating on the edge of the world. When that night arrived, it was customary for a flame to be lit in silence, not as a prayer, but as a reminder that warmth and light would return. The church later softened this belief, shaping it into a more familiar festival. Yet some monks, moved by reverence for memory rather than rule, kept the older vigil in secret. And it was here, behind the thick monastery walls, in a chapel seldom used and nearly forgotten, that the lantern burned through night after night, unchanged by time's cold breath. The listener enters the chapel now, not through a door of wood and iron, but through the gentle unfolding of remembrance. The stones rise around you, worn smooth by centuries of whispered prayers. They glimmer faintly beneath the glow of the lantern, like the inside of a seashell brushed by moonlight. At the far end of the chapel, hidden behind an altar carved with thorn-wreathed leaves, lies the small niche where the lantern rests. Its flame flickers but never falters. Some say it was tended by monks, who understood that certain rituals needed no spoken words. Others say the lantern tended itself, an impossible endurance granted by the winter night for reasons long lost. Whispers tell us that on certain evenings, when snow fell especially thick, and the world felt distant and dreamlike, the lantern's flame appeared brighter, growing as though fed by an unseen breath. In forgotten ledgers found in the monastery's library, there are notes, barely more than faint strokes of ink, hinting at a ceremony held here once a year. A vigil without chanting, without incantation, without witness. A circle of monks standing in complete stillness as the lantern glowed between them, their robes heavy with the cold, their breath rising like pale threads into the darkness. The notes do not say what the ceremony honored, only that it was older than any living memory, and older still than the written word. At the back of the chapel, beneath a thin blanket of dust, lies a carved icon, its edges softened by time. It shows a figure holding a small flame, cupped between open hands. The face is indistinct, smoothed to anonymity by centuries of reverence. Some believe the figure represented the returning sun. Others think it symbolized the winter spirit who kept watch while the world slept. A few have suggested it was neither, a depiction of light itself, sacred and nameless, belonging to no faith and all of them at once. The icon, once hidden behind the altar, suggests that the lantern was more than a simple flame. It was a message carried through time, a quiet thread woven from one age into the next. As moonlight slips through the frost-dimmed windows of the chapel, the air seems to shimmer with a faint hymn. Not a melody, exactly, but a memory of one, soft as the echo of a voice dreaming in sleep. The ancient songs of winter, sung when the earth was young, and belief took the shape of fire rather than scripture. You may imagine the monks here, hundreds of winters ago, shuffling in from the cold, their sandals dusted with snow, their hoods pulled low, their faces lit only by the lantern's glow. One by one, they would gather in a silent circle around the flame. No one spoke. No one dared to break the stillness, for the ceremony they protected was not meant to stir the air. It was meant to honor the breath of the world itself. Outside, the wind would press against the chapel, searching for a way in. But the stones held firm, keeping the vigil untouched. And within that circle, the flame flickered gently, casting soft arcs of light that stretched and curled across the walls, revealing faint traces of murals long faded. A wheel of stars, a spiral, a rising sun, a sleeping moon. The symbols themselves seemed to breathe, illuminated for a moment before returning to shadow. And perhaps this is why the lantern endured. For what is winter, if not a season of memory, of holding on, of waiting, of trusting that the light will return? It is said that one monk, whose name has vanished from all records, tended the lantern long after the old rites were forbidden. He would slip quietly from his quarters in the deepest part of the night, moving like a shadow through the corridors. In his hands he carried a small pouch of oil, pressed from herbs that grew only beneath the first frost. Some believed this oil carried the scent of forgotten summers. Others thought it was simply a practical mixture, valued for its slow burn. But the monk kept its recipe secret, revealing it to no one. Night after night, he lit the lantern anew, ensuring its flame never died. He wrote of its light only once, in the margin of a page filled with scripture. A single sentence. To guard the light is to guard the memory of the world. The words faded with time, yet the meaning lingers. In the centuries that followed, the monastery weathered storms, famine and flood. The brothers came and went. The chapel was abandoned, then rediscovered, then forgotten again. But the lantern endured, sometimes tended, sometimes left alone, yet always alight when someone happened upon it. Some argued it was chance. Others claimed it was faith. A few whispered it was neither. That the lantern held a purpose, understood only by the winter itself. Tonight, as you stand within a dim, silenced chapel, though your presence is only a drifting thought, the flame seems to sense you. It trembles, dancing in a slow, delicate rhythm, as though greeting a traveler who has wandered far through snow and time to reach this place. The shadows shift. The dust glitters like powdered stars. The air hums with a feeling of recognition, as if the chapel remembers you from some earlier life. You move closer. The lantern's glow deepens, brushing warmth across your face. In its golden circle, the stones appear ancient yet alive, their imperfections meaningful, their cracks like fault lines of forgotten stories. And for a moment, you feel you are not looking at a flame, but at a memory, the memory of all the winters that have ever been. The chapel breathes, the flame leans, then straightens. A soft sigh moves through the rafters. Outside, the snow falls heavier now, a quiet curtain drawn across the world. Whispers tell us that in such moments, when winter presses close and the earth seems suspended, the lantern reveals its true purpose. To remind us that even in the coldest seasons, light has a way of surviving. Not through brilliance or force, but through patience, through quiet endurance. Perhaps that is why the monks protected it. Perhaps that is why the icon rests beneath the altar. Perhaps that is why the flame refuses to die. As the chapter nears its close, the lantern dims slightly, withdrawing into itself like a creature settling into sleep. The glow softens, the shadows deepen, the air grows still. Yet the flame does not vanish. It lingers, small, persistent, unafraid. A final thought drifts through the chapel, carried on the hush of winter's breath. What quiet truths were preserved in the glow of a flame that refused to die? No answer follows, only silence, and the gentle trembling of the lantern's eternal light as the night folds itself around you. It is said that at the far edge of an old village, so old that its name has fallen from maps and memories alike, there lies an orchard touched more by silence than by time. Even now, long after the last caretaker has gone, and the path to it has been softened by moss, the orchard waits beneath a hush that feels almost sacred. When winter descends and frost gathers like white breath along the branches, the whole place seems to glow with a pale, dreamlike stillness. This is where our story begins. In the hush of a frost-covered orchard, branches bare, yet carrying the quiet memory of a forgotten midwinter blessing. Some believe that these trees once bore the sweetest fruit in the region, ripened under summers now lost to centuries of dust. But others whisper that their true purpose was never meant to be harvest. They say the orchard was a meeting place, a threshold where villagers gathered beneath torchlight in the deepest nights of winter, offering cider to the sleeping roots, whispering gratitude to unseen guardians dwelling beneath the cold earth. You can imagine them there, their cloaks heavy with snow, the breath rising in faint spirals. A lantern or two swinging softly. A jug of warm cider passed from hand to hand. No grand procession, no priestly command. Only the villagers, the trees, the winter air, and something older. Something that watched and listened from the spaces between roots. In forgotten corners of the earth, winter once carried different meanings. It was not always a season to be endured, but a spirit to be honored. A guest who visited each year, bringing stories of the long night and promises of return. And this orchard, hidden from the eyes of kings and the ink of chroniclers, was once one of the places where people remembered that truth. Tonight, as you walk through the drifting snow, the orchard rises around you like a quiet congregation. The trees stand tall but humbled by age. Their trunks twist like ancient script. Their branches reach upward in gestures that feel both yearning and protective. Frost clings to every limb, shimmering softly as moonlight brushes the orchard with silver. The air is still, cold but not unkind. It feels like a held breath. Beneath your feet, the snow is untouched, save for the faintest suggestion of old paths, worn so deeply into the earth that even centuries of winter could not entirely erase them. These were the paths the villagers walked in slow, reverent circles around the eldest trees. It is said these circles were not simply motions, but prayers. Prayers woven from footsteps instead of words. The rhythm of devotion rising not from vocal cords, but from the way a body moves through space. Some records, fragile, half-scorched pages tucked into the folds of early medieval manuscripts reference a ceremony performed in rural corners long after the church declared such rites unnecessary. They describe carved charms hung from branches, small wooden figures, each shaped with careful hands. Stars, spirals, suns, animals that once guarded the harvest, faces that once guarded the night. The charms hung lightly, swaying in the winter wind, whispering their soft wood-on-wood music. Whispers tell us these charms were offerings to the orchard spirits, beings neither wholly divine nor wholly earthly, guardians of slumbering roots, keepers of frost, carriers of old memory. And though the names of these beings have faded, their presence lingers like the last notes of a forgotten lullaby. As you wander deeper among the trees, you may feel the orchard shift, not in movement, but in mood. Here, where the branches form an archway overhead, the air thickens with something almost tangible. A veil between seasons, a breath caught between worlds. This place has always been a threshold, a meeting ground between the living and the resting, between the cold earth and the sleeping seeds, between the rituals humans remember and the ones the land itself holds. Perhaps that is why the villagers came here, to wassail the trees as they once called it, to pour warm cider at their roots, believing the aroma, the steam, the sweetness would please the spirits of winter and encourage the orchard to wake gently when the sun's strength returned. Picture it. Cider poured in a slow, deliberate cascade. The scent rising like an offering. Torches flickering. Snow drifting. Voices humming old songs. Songs that once carried the dual weight of celebration and plea. Some of these wassailing songs still survive in fragments. A verse here. A refrain there. Their words softened by centuries. Altered by tongues that no longer remember their origins. But beneath the revisions, there is an older cadence, a rhythm that feels less like music and more like invocation. In those days, a verse might have been sung to awaken the orchard. Awake, good tree, awake, let winter hear your breath, let summer find your branches whole. But no one can say for certain. The orchard keeps its secrets well. Where memory fades, the land remembers. A faint wind stirs now, brushing snow from a branch in a soft, feathery fall. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel as though someone has passed close by. Not a person, not a shadow, but a presence, a gentle movement of awareness, like a quiet gaze turned in your direction. This is not the spirit of fear, but of company, of something that has been here for hundreds of winters and is quietly acknowledging your steps. It is in these small wonders, these soft moments, that the orchard reveals itself. As you drift further into its heart, you come upon the oldest tree of all, wide as a cottage wall, with a hollow at its base, shaped like the mouth of a cave. This is where offerings were once placed. A scrap of cloth, a twist of dried herbs, perhaps a sliver of carved stone, carrying a symbol now beyond translation. Some believe this tree was a guardian, a watcher, a vessel through which winter spirits once walked from one world to another. Others think it simply witnessed so many winters that it grew wise in silence. The snow at its roots lies deeper, untouched, almost sculpted by stillness. You kneel, or perhaps only lean closer in your mind, and imagine the villagers gathered here, young and old, stern and soft-hearted, carrying with them all the fears and hopes of long-ago winters. They would bow their heads, some would close their eyes. Others would place a hand on the tree's bark, feeling the deep pulse of life beneath its cold exterior. They believed the tree listened, and perhaps it did, for even now the air around it feels warmer, as though holding the remnants of breath left behind by generations. Beneath the silence, a deeper silence waits, a silence that holds memory like roots hold the dark earth. There were winters, the villagers said, when the orchard glowed with faint lights, dancing fireflies that did not belong to summer. Lights that came from nowhere and vanished just as quietly. Some claimed these were the spirits themselves, walking the paths the villagers had worn smooth, moving from tree to tree, blessing the orchard in return. Others say the lights were merely tricks of cold and moon, but those who gathered here knew otherwise. In the orchard, nothing was merely anything. Everything held meaning. Everything breathed mystery. Snow falls again, soft and sure, gathering along the limbs overhead. The orchard seems to exhale, as though settling deeper into winter's embrace. You feel its stillness begin to fold around you like a woolen cloak, comforting, steady, slow. Perhaps it is time now to leave the orchard to its dreams. As you begin to retreat, the trees seem to lean inward, closing the path behind you bit by bit. Not to trap you, but to restore the quiet they have kept for centuries. The charms no longer hang from their branches. The cider has long dried. The songs have gone silent. Yet something of it all remains. A presence, a warmth, a memory, older than any human voice. The orchard becomes distant behind you, fading into the soft fall of snow. Its spirits remain unspoken but felt, waiting just beyond the final drift of white, lingering at the edge of your awareness. And as the scene dissolves, a silence returns, and winter wraps the land in its deepest breath. A final whisper drifts through the frost. Some places never forget the footsteps of those who once walked with spirits. And some spirits never leave the places that loved them. The orchard sleeps, and somewhere in that sleep, winter listens. It is said that beneath every monastery lies a world the stone walls never meant to reveal. A world of chambers carved before names were written, of echoes older than scripture, of dust that remembers footsteps no record dares to name. And tonight, as the wind moves softly through the rafters of the abandoned hall above, we descend into the hidden world. A question opens this tale, quiet but insistent. What became of the midwinter feast that left no trace except a few scattered lines in a cloister ledger? Just a handful of sentences, written centuries ago in a careful hand. They mention a gathering, a preparation, a blessing neither fully Christian nor fully pagan. And then nothing more. No recipe. No description of the rituals. No indication of why the event was hidden in the first place. Only an emptiness where answers should be. So tonight, by lantern glow and listening breath, we follow that emptiness. We step downward along narrow stairs, worn smooth by monks who once walked with hushed purpose. The walls press close, chilled by the breath of winter seeping through the stones. A faint scent lingers, of earth, of old wood, perhaps even of spices once carried from distant lands. The first chamber waits at the foot of the stairs. Its ceiling arches low, shaped like a shell formed from time itself. Dust settles in soft layers, undisturbed save for the paths left by mice and the faint marks of boots, older than memory. You may imagine the monks entering this place, their robes trailing like shadows. They would have brought candles, their flames trembling as though uncertain whether to illuminate or to protect. This was once a place of quiet preparation, vegetables chopped with reverence, grains poured like sand into clay bowls, herbs crushed between calloused palms to release their winter scents. But the food, the ledger hints, was not made solely for the monks. Some believe the feast honored the solstice, when the sun hesitated at the edge of its journey, lingering in the dark as though gathering its strength. Others think it welcomed the turning of the agricultural wheel, a gratitude offering to the sleeping earth. A few whisper that the meal was made not for humans, but for winter itself. Whispers tell us that certain foods were prepared as gifts to the season, a symbolic nourishment meant to keep the cold at bay and coax the world into patience until spring returned. You may picture the dishes now, roasted grains steeped with honey, thick loaves baked with dried berries, roots simmered until their fragrance softened the air, recipes older than the monastery. Older, perhaps, than the faith that built it. But no page survives. Only a cryptic note in a monk's private collection, the ink so faded it seems like a breath, more than a word. The feast must be shared with the dark, for the dark remembers. The candle flickers. We move deeper. Another chamber reveals itself like a memory returning, long, narrow, carved directly from stone. At its center stands a table so ancient that its surface has grown almost smooth, its ridges softened by countless touch-ins. In the lantern light, markings begin to emerge. Scores, grooves, indentations hinting at repetitive motions. Bowls placed, bread broken, hands folded, blessings spoken. Not in Latin, but in older tongues whispered out of habit, preserved through mothers and grandmothers long before these monks ever walked upon the earth. On the far beam overhead, where dust has settled thickly, you see it, the undeciphered symbol, a spiral encircled by a ring of tiny stars. So simple in shape, yet so heavy with intent. It is carved with careful hands, each line knowing exactly where it wishes to be. Some see in it the turning of the seasons. Others see the cycle of life and death. A few suggest it marks a star path once followed by travelers whose names the earth has long since hidden. The monks, it seems, were not blind to its meaning. They preserved it, not boldly, not defiantly, but quietly, allowing it to watch over their midwinter feast like a silent guest. The air shifts again. Beneath the silence, something murmurs, a suggestion of footsteps, long faded, returning only in imagination. It is not frightening. It is a recall, a soft echo of lives lived reverently. We step through a small archway into the deepest chamber of all. This one is round, like the inside of a great bowl. Its floor holds a faint outline, a circular groove worn by countless feet moving in gentle procession. The circle is perfect, or as perfect as bodies moving in meditation can make it. It is here, it seems, that the most ancient portion of the feast took place. Not the eating, but the remembering. Villagers used to circle fires. Pagans circled sacred stones. Even early Christians circled shrines in prayer. These monks, perhaps without fully understanding why, preserved the spiral of movement, the circling of time, the honoring of a rhythm older than doctrine. Some believe this room was once part of a pre-Christian site, absorbed, softened, repurposed. But memory has a way of seeping through like warm broth through cloth. It cannot be fully erased. Perhaps that is why the feast survived for as long as it did. Not out of rebellion, but out of instinct. As the lantern glows against the stone, you can almost hear them, footsteps moving in slow arcs, sandals brushing the floor, voices humming a sound that is not quite chant, not quite song, but something between the two, something shaped like breath offered to the dark. The aroma of warm bread lingers, fragile as a dream. The spices rise again, faint but insistent. The bowls sit empty now, but their presence remains like a ghost of nourishment. It is said the monks did not feast until after the ritual circle was walked. Only then would they gather at the table, break the bread, and share the warmth of the food. The feast itself was simple. Its complexity lay not in its taste, but in its meaning. Each dish carried a story, a memory, a whisper from an age when people believed that the world's survival depended on giving something back to it. You may imagine the moment when the monks sat together in the flickering candlelight, their winter robes wrapped tightly around them, their faces lit by soft glows, their eyes still full of whatever mysteries had stirred in the chamber before. Bread passed from hand to hand, steam rising from clay bowls, a hum settling over the room like a blanket. Their feast was not for celebration, it was for continuity, for gratitude, for connection. And as we linger with them in imagination, the warmth of that meal begins to radiate across centuries. Not the heat of fire, but the warmth of companionship, of quiet traditions carried gently through time. As we move back through the chambers, the lantern's flame grows softer. The dust settles once again into its ancient resting places. The symbols blur in the dimness. The table becomes still. The circle of footsteps fades into smooth stone. You sense the monastery above, its walls long abandoned, unaware of the sacred history sleeping beneath its foundations. And yet, something remains. A warmth, not physical but emotional, rests on the air like the echo of hands sharing bread. Perhaps the feast was not forgotten after all. Not entirely. Some traditions survive despite silence, preserved not in pages or proclamations, but in spaces, in rituals, in the way certain places seem to hold their breath when winter arrives. As you ascend the stairs, leaving the chambers to their unbroken quiet, a final whisper drifts across the stone, soft as dust falling into place. Some feasts are not meant to be remembered by record, but by the warmth they leave behind. And just before the last candle dims, before the monastery's stones reclaim their deep, familiar silence, you feel one lingering truth. Perhaps the ancient feast was never lost, only resting, waiting for someone to listen. The chamber closes behind you. The question dissolves into quiet, and winter holds the story gently in its hands. It is said that in forgotten winters, when the moon hung low over the rooftops like a pale watching eye, a single bell would toll across a sleeping medieval town. Its voice was slow, deep, and strangely tender, like an old memory rising from the earth. Beneath that sound, the world seemed to pause. Snowflakes drifted more gently. Fireplaces crackled more softly. Even the restless wind bowed its head. This is where our journey begins. A distant bell calling through the night. A town wrapped in silence. Streets brimming with frost. And somewhere in that stillness, movement. Whispers tell us that at the stroke of midnight, long after the last tavern had emptied and the final hearth fire dimmed to embers, a hidden procession began its slow descent into the streets. There were no trumpets, no banners, no grand announcements, only shapes, shadowed figures cloaked against the cold. emerging one by one from alleyways, archways, and heavy wooden doors. They carried candles, each flame trembling like a fallen star cupped within their gloved hands. Their faces were obscured by hoods. Their steps were deliberate, measured by something older than time. And though no voice spoke, you could feel a rhythm binding them together. Some quiet vow shared among those who understood the night in a way the rest of the town had long forgotten. Travelers' journals mention these midnight pilgrims only in fragments. A merchant passing through in the late 1300s wrote of a line of lanterns gliding like ghosts through the narrow lanes. A wandering monk recalled hearing feet on the snow soft as prayer. A noble woman fleeing winter storms claimed she glimpsed a river of fireflies drifting along the frozen cobbles. But none of them knew why the procession walked. Some believed they honored the winter solstice, quietly preserving rituals from centuries before the church laid claim to the season. Others thought they walked to remember the dead, those who once lived in these homes, now shuttered and silent. A few whispered that they carried their candles for the night itself, feeding it warmth so it would not swallow the world in endless cold. No one agrees, and perhaps that is the nature of the procession, meant not to be understood, only witnessed. Tonight you walk beside them. The snow crunches faintly beneath your feet, each step softened by layers of white. The air is crisp but not harsh, as though respecting the sacredness of the hour. The town feels suspended, caught between waking and dreaming, between past and present. Lantern light spills across stone walls, across shuttered windows, across frost-laced wells that seem to watch the procession pass. The candles illuminate only a few feet ahead, leaving the rest of the world wrapped in deep shadow. But the shadows feel gentle, like the folds of a cloak protecting a secret, rather than hiding a threat. You turn a corner with the pilgrims and enter a narrow lane where the buildings lean inward, their timber frames sighing with age. Icicles hang from the eaves like glass teeth. Snow rests heavy on the rooftops, and in the dimness you can almost believe that the town is breathing, slowly, sleepily, anciently. It is said that in this very lane, centuries ago, a fire once consumed half the street. But tonight, only the cold glows, only the candles burn. The procession moves on without pause, as if acknowledging the layers of history beneath its feet. The joys, the sorrows, the unspoken stories woven into every timber and stone. A soft wind rises, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and winter pine. The pilgrims do not lift their heads. They walk with eyes lowered, as though seeing not the street before them but something within the snow itself. A memory, a presence, a path marked by the moon. The lanterns flicker, the flames bend, then straighten, as if bowing to the night. You pass a frozen fountain, its basin coated with a thin layer of ice that captures reflections like an ancient mirror. In the surface, the procession appears doubled, an earthly line of lights above and a ghostly echo beneath. For a moment, the two lines seem to overlap, and you wonder whether this ritual is meant for the living alone, or for those who have walked here before and still walk here now, unseen but not forgotten. Beneath the silence, there is something like a hum, not a sound exactly, but a resonance, an awareness shared among the pilgrims and the night itself. It pulls you gently forward. The procession continues toward the town square. Once filled with markets and laughter in warmer months, the square now lies deserted, blanketed in untouched snow. The statue at its center, a knight or saint or long-lost ruler, stands draped in frost, its features softened beyond recognition. The pilgrims circle it slowly, their candles casting halos of light on the statue's frozen face. Some believe this circling was once a way to bless the entire town, drawing light around its heart like a protective ribbon. Others think it honored someone whose name has been erased by time. But most agree on one thing. This was never a festival. It was always a prayer. The candles quiver as though moved by breath, though none of the pilgrims speak. Their silence is not empty. It is full of reverence, full of memory, full of something older than language. Beyond the square, the procession turns down another lane, narrower still. The buildings here are smaller, humbler, their windows shuttered with simple wooden boards. A dog sleeps beneath the overhang of a door, undisturbed by the passing light. A lone bird, startled by the glow, rustles its feathers in the rafters and settles again. You feel as though you have stepped into the world between minutes, a place where time softens and the night reveals its gentler face. Whispers tell us that children once watched from their windows, peeking through cracks in shutters to glimpse the floating lights. They believed the procession carried blessings, quiet, invisible ones that protected them through the coldest nights. Some claimed that if you placed a candle in your own window during the procession, you would dream of good fortune. Others believed you might see the faint outline of someone you had lost walk among the pilgrims, candle in hand. Whether these beliefs were superstition or truth is unclear. What matters is the tenderness behind them, proof that this ritual once meant something to the people who lived here. As the procession leaves the humble homes behind, the lane opens to a small chapel at the edge of the town. Its stone walls are pale beneath the moonlight, its door slightly ajar, as though inviting the night inside. But the pilgrims do not enter. They pause only briefly, letting their candles glow against the chapel's threshold, then continue onward. Perhaps they once entered. Perhaps this was once the final destination. But time has shifted the ritual's shape, as it shifts all things. Now, the path leads outward, toward the town's boundary, where snow grows deeper and the houses fall away. The wind lifts again, brushing the flames. The pilgrims raise their candles slightly, protecting them with cupped hands. And then you notice something. There are fewer participants than when you began. Some candles seem to have vanished. Some figures have melted into the darkness between buildings. This does not alarm you. It feels natural, as though the procession itself is thinning, dissolving gently as dawn approaches. You continue walking. The sky begins to pale at the edges, where night loosens its grip. The first hues of dawn, soft blue, muted rose, brush the horizon like hesitant fingers. The town shifts subtly beneath this growing light, its shadows retreating, its silence deepening as the procession completes its final steps. One by one, the flames fade. One by one, the pilgrims disappear into the thinning darkness, not turning corners, not slipping into homes, but simply dissolving, as though they were made not of flesh but of breath, not of bodies but of memory, not of presence but of ritual. In the last moment, before the sun's first rays touch the snow, only a single candle remains. It floats ahead, held by a cloaked figure whose footsteps leave no imprint. The flame wavers, steadies, and then, very softly, goes out. The bell does not toll again. The town remains silent. The snow-covered streets lie empty, untouched except for your own faint path. You stand in the quiet glow of a winter dawn, the world around you slowly knitting itself back into ordinary time. And yet, something lingers, something delicate, like a breath held in the space between thoughts. Who were they honoring as they walked beneath the moon? The night itself? The winter? The forgotten? The living? The lost? Perhaps it was never meant to be known. Perhaps it is enough simply to have walked among them for a while, to have felt the calm reverence of their steps, to have seen how faith can move through a town like a soft wind rather than a roaring fire. As the light strengthens and morning takes its rightful place, the memory of the procession drifts upward like smoke, fragile, luminous, waiting to settle in the quiet corners of your mind. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And tonight, the snow holds those echoes gently, inviting them to rest until the next moment someone wonders, or dreams, or walks alone beneath the midnight moon. It is said that in the farthest corner of an abandoned monastery, so far from warmth that winter itself seems to nest in the stones, there lies a door few living hands have touched. A door of dark, heavy wood, streaked with age, its iron hinges chilled, as though carved from frozen night. It leans slightly inward, as if listening for footsteps that have long stopped coming. Tonight, the door waits. A single lantern glows in your hand, its light trembling like a hesitant breath. Snow drifts in from a cracked window down the hall, gathering in soft white piles along the edges of the stone floor. The silence is deep, so deep it feels almost alive. When you push gently against the wooden door, it answers with a long, low creak that echoes into the darkness beyond. The library awakens. You step through the threshold, and the lantern's glow stretches into a room untouched by centuries. Shelves bow beneath winter dust, their wood warped, yet dignified. Manuscripts fill them in uneven stacks, bound in leather that has stiffened with age, tied with cords frayed to threads. Cobwebs cling to corners, silvered by frost, like delicate curtains hiding the passage of time. The air is cold, ancient, still. It feels as though the room has been holding its breath for 100 winters, and only now, in your lantern's soft glow, does it exhale, slowly, reluctantly. Some believe this library was sealed in haste when the monastery embraced more formal traditions, leaving behind the softer, older rites that once shaped the turning of the year. Others say the monks feared the power of these manuscripts, feared what memories might awaken if the pages were opened again. But no record mentions this room. No inventory lists it. No chronicle claims its books. It is a secret suspended beneath the surface of time. Your lantern light settles on the nearest shelf, illuminating a manuscript half buried beneath dust. Its cover is cracked and flaking, its corners curled inward like a wilted leaf. When you lift it, the weight surprises you, dense with centuries of forgotten hands. The pages open with a sigh, as though waking from a long sleep. Within, drawings appear, faded but unmistakable. Evergreen bowls arranged in shapes that do not match the festive wreaths familiar today. Spirals, knots, constellation patterns woven through with vines. These were not decorations, but symbols. Codes passed from village to village, carrying meanings softened by distance and softened further by time. Some shapes resemble protective wards, meant to guard homes from winter spirits that wandered freely in the long nights. Others carry a sense of invitation, as though beckoning the cold season toward warmth. As you trace one of the spirals with your eyes, frost flecks drift from the ceiling, shimmering like dust from another world. You turn the page. Here, candlelit vigils unfold, men and women standing beneath eaves heavy with snow, each holding a lantern as though participating in a silent conversation with the night. Their heads are bowed. Their breath rises into the dark like offerings. The text beneath the drawings is difficult to decipher, the ink eroded into faded curls and strokes. But certain words emerge. Midwinter, watch, remembrance, star-marked night, ancestral breath. Each fragment hints at rites older than scripture, older even than the monastery itself. These were rituals whispered from generation to generation, carried from hearth to hearth, shaped by cold nights and warm hopes. Rites meant not only to celebrate winter, but to survive it. You turn another page and another, each revealing hints of these traditions. Some manuscripts offer recipes, strange mixtures of herbs, roots, and berries, burned in small bowls to appease unseen forces. Others describe gatherings in forest clearings, where villagers sang low, rhythmic songs believed to coax the sun to return. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, these rituals were practiced in secret, long after towns and churches forbade them. They persisted in gestures, in symbols, carved quietly into doorframes, in candles, lit without explanation. Rites that once belonged to everyone, rites now sleeping in the dark. Your lantern flickers. Shadows waver across the shelves, giving the illusion that the manuscripts themselves shift in their bindings, as if turning to listen. On a high shelf rests a scroll tied with crimson thread. When you pull it gently downward, the thread falls away. Perhaps it was never tied tightly, and the parchment unfurls in a slow, graceful motion. Images spill across it in ink the color of dried blood. Evergreen boughs forming a protective circle, footsteps arranged in a spiral around a central flame, a moon marked with 7 stars, a pair of hands releasing a breath towards the sky. The breath is a common motif, appearing again and again, as though everything in these rites, these silent, hidden ceremonies, depended on the recognition that breath itself is sacred, that the cold could take it away, and that the return of warmth could restore it. These were rituals of gratitude for survival, of surrender to forces beyond comprehension, of welcoming winter not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Whispers tell us that some rites were performed solely to protect the children of a household. Others sought to honor ancestors whose wisdom still guided the living. A few were offerings to winter spirits who guarded the land when fields lay empty, and the night stretched impossibly long. You lift a heavier manuscript from a lower shelf. Its pages feel thick, almost waxy. When opened, it reveals codes, rows of symbols arranged in patterns resembling litany, but not written in any known language. Spirals again. Lines like rivers, dots forming constellations. Vertical strokes punctuating empty spaces. Was this a forgotten alphabet? A ritual chant? A map of seasonal stars? Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Perhaps it was meant only to be remembered. As you continue through the library, the manuscripts grow stranger, older, more ambiguous. Some are filled entirely with drawings of hands. Hands cupped, hands raised, hands touching snowflakes drawn with painstaking precision. Others show lanterns placed in windowsills in patterns suggesting a silent communication between houses. You begin to see repetition. A lantern, A spiral, an evergreen bough, a star with a long tail, a pair of hands offering something unseen. Symbols of winter devotion, symbols of survival, symbols of the quiet reverence that shaped entire villages, even as official chronicles erase those memories. It is said the monks preserved these manuscripts only out of respect for history's fragile threads. But some believe they kept them for another reason. Because the rites held a gentle, unnameable truth. Something too soft to be spoken aloud. Something too delicate to survive exposure. Perhaps these rites reminded them of a time when faith was not divided, when people did not choose between seasons and scriptures, but carried both like twin flames through the dark. Your lantern dims further. The library grows colder, as though reclaiming its slumber. You approach the far wall, where the shelves give way to a single stone dais. Atop it lies a manuscript larger than all the rest. Bound in leather as pale as winter sky, it seems untouched by dust, almost waiting. When you open it, the pages glow faintly in the lantern light, revealing an illustration so detailed it feels like a memory etched into the paper itself. A winter night, a village beneath the moon, people gathered around a tree, its branches adorned not with fruit, but with small carved symbols. Lanterns hang from each bough, their flames reflecting in the snow below. No words accompany this image, only the stillness of the scene, a stillness that feels sacred. Perhaps this was the oldest rite of all. Perhaps it survived only here. Perhaps it was never meant to be explained. You linger in the silence. The lantern's flame grows smaller, shrinking into a single golden bead. You feel the cold deepen around you, not harshly but inevitably, like the settling of a blanket. It is time to leave. You close the manuscript with care. Place it gently back upon the dais. Then step backward, letting the shadows reclaim the shelves, the scrolls, the drawings, the codes. The lantern light withdraws, revealing only darkness where knowledge once glimmered. You reach the door. It closes behind you with a soft, resonant thud, and the library returns to sleep. As you carry your dim lantern back through the snow-dusted hallway, a final thought stirs, fragile as frost on a window pane. Some knowledge is too gentle and too strange to survive in daylight. But in the silence of winter, beneath forgotten stones, it lives, it breathes, it waits. And perhaps, on nights like this one, it wakes long enough for someone to listen. It is said that on certain winter nights, nights so still that even the wind seems to fold its wings and rest, one star shines brighter than all the rest. A single point of light, unwavering, suspended like a silver lantern above the frozen world. Farmers once knew its arrival by instinct, long before calendars or almanacs. Shepherds would pause in their long walks to gaze upward. Elders would gather the young near the hearth to whisper its oldest name. But none watched it more carefully than the pilgrims. Our journey begins in a frozen field, pale and silent under that star's steady glow. Snow stretches unbroken from horizon to horizon, rippling in drifts that resemble the gentle rise and fall of a sleeping sea. The cold air gleams faintly, the way breath gleams when wrapped in moonlight. And there, reflected on the untouched snow, lies the shape of the star, sharp, serene, almost sacred. It is here, on nights such as this one, that the pilgrims first stepped forward. Their cloaks were heavy, woven from wool so dense, it held the memory of every winter it had endured. Their hoods were drawn low to shield their eyes from the biting cold. Their boots sank softly into the snow, as though the earth itself wished to welcome them into its dormant embrace. And though their numbers varied from year to year, sometimes a handful, sometimes dozens, they always walked in silence. Silence was part of the ritual, a vow, a reverence, a way of listening for what words could not reveal. These pilgrims were not heading to a distant city, nor to a well-known shrine. They followed no beaten path, no torchlit road. Instead, their destination lay hidden deep within the forest. A sacred grove, whispered of in legends older than the villages scattered across the valley. Some claimed the grove had existed since the world was young. Others believed it appeared only in midwinter, revealed by the stars' precise alignment. Whispers tell us the grove was a gate between worlds. Not a gate of stone or wood, but a gate of breath, of shadow, of stillness. Each year, when the winter star climbed to its highest point, the pilgrims began their journey across the frozen fields, guided by its unwavering brilliance. As you walk beside them in imagination, the snow crunches beneath your feet, soft, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat echoing across the night. The pilgrim's breath rises in faint white clouds, gathering briefly in the air before dissolving into the quiet. Above you, the star pulses with cold light, illuminating the frost that clings to branches, rooftops, and the edges of their cloaks. The forest stands ahead, a vast silhouette of bare limbs reaching skyward, each tree dusted with moonlight. The boundary between field and forest feels more like a threshold than a simple change in scenery, an entryway into memory, or myth, or something older still. The pilgrims cross it without fear. The trees whisper faintly as the wind begins to stir, scattering fine snow from their branches. The path, if it can be called a path, is narrow, winding between trunks that twist like ancient pillars. Animal tracks crisscross the snow, but none are recent. The forest seems to be sleeping, its breath slow and steady beneath the cold. Some believe the forest spirits watched these pilgrims, unseen but attentive. Others say the trees themselves remembered each footstep, storing the echoes within their rings. Whatever the truth, the forest feels alive, not threatening, but aware, as though it recognizes those who walk with reverence. As the pilgrims move deeper, soft chants rise from their midst. Not sung so much as breathed, little more than a hum carried on the air. The melody is simple, repeating like a circle. Their voices blend together, forming a sound that seems woven from snowflakes and starlight. No one alive remembers the original words, but the shape of them remains. Gratitude, hope, humility. The chants drift upward, brushing against branches and lingering there like a frost-kissed prayer. In forgotten corners of the earth, midwinter was once honored not with feasts or grand ceremonies, but with quiet gestures. Lanterns placed on windowsills, grains scattered on frozen ground, evergreen boughs hung by thresholds for protection. These pilgrims carried that older wisdom in their steps. They walked because walking itself was an offering. Every footfall said, "We are here. We endure. We remember." Their destination, the sacred grove, comes into view gradually, revealed by the subtle curve of the land. At first, it appears as only a thinning of trees, a subtle widening of space. But soon the forest parts, unveiling a ring of ancient trunks encircling a clearing of untouched snow. This is a grove. The branches overhead knit together in a loose dome, leaving only a small opening through which the winter star shines, like an eye gazing directly at the earth. The snow within the ring is smoother than elsewhere, as if preserved by something unseen. And the air feels different, warmer, though the cold still presses close. It is a warmth not of temperature, but of presence. The pilgrims step into the grove with care, their heads bowed. Here they do not kneel, they do not speak, they do not light new candles or set down lanterns. Instead, they approach the base of the eldest tree, the one whose trunk is so wide it would take 6 arms to encircle it, and place their offerings. Each offering is simple: a handful of evergreen needles, a small carved charm, a piece of fruit preserved from autumn, bread baked earlier in the day, a ribbon of fabric, a single breath released into the air. Some offerings remain tangible, others vanish quickly into the snow, claimed by the cold. The meaning does not lie in the object, but in the giving. It is said this grove served as a meeting place between faiths, where older earthbound rituals intertwined with the rising tide of Christian symbolism. Some pilgrims traced a cross in the air before offering their gift. Others whispered the names of saints or angels. A few murmured prayers whose languages were no longer spoken anywhere except in these woods. In this grove, contradiction softened into harmony. The star above symbolized both heavenly guidance and celestial mystery. The evergreen symbolized both eternal life and the endurance of nature through the darkest season. The circle of trees mirrored the shape of halos and the shape of ancient runes. Here, boundaries dissolved. The pilgrims believed the winter star opened a gate between worlds, a moment when the earthly and the divine could touch, however briefly. When gratitude and hope braided together more closely than at any other moment of the year. Standing among them now, if only in imagination, you feel the pull of that belief, the quiet, the awe, the stillness shaped not by emptiness, but by presence. The star gleams brighter overhead. The snow glows faintly beneath your feet. And then, as though sensing its purpose fulfilled, the star begins to sink toward the western horizon. The pilgrims watch in silence as its light fades, slowly dimming until it becomes just another point in the sky. And with its setting, the ritual ends. They step back from the eldest tree, gather their cloaks, turn away from the grove, and begin their return journey through the forest. The snow muffles their steps, and soon the sound disappears entirely. Their forms blur among the trees. Their lanterns dim and vanish. Their figures dissolve into the frost-veiled horizon. And just like that, the pilgrims are gone. Only the grove remains, holding their memory like a breath suspended in cold air. Only the faint imprint of their footsteps remains on the snow, footprints that the wind will soon erase. As dawn creeps gently across the frozen fields, its light brushes the tops of the trees, kissing them into morning. The star is no longer visible. The field looks ordinary once more, its magic hidden beneath a thin layer of frost. Yet something lingers, a presence, a softness, a hush that feels deeper than silence. Perhaps it is the echo of the pilgrims' footsteps. Perhaps it is the residue of their offerings resting beneath the snow. Or perhaps it is the knowledge that rituals do not vanish. They simply become quieter, waiting for someone willing to listen. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. And as the winter morning unfolds, a final truth drifts like snow across your thoughts. Those who followed the winter star left behind more than footprints. They left a trail of wonder, one that glows long after the star has set. It is said that in the quietest corners of the world, where the wind moves like a ghost across the hills and winter presses gently against the walls of old homes. There are hearths that still remember, hearths that crackle with the heat of stories whispered long before the first church bell claimed the season. Hearths that burn not only with fire, but with memory. Our story begins beside one such hearth. A solitary flame rises from logs stacked carefully in a winter cottage. The room around it is dim, still wrapped in a soft hush as snow drifts against the windows. Shadow gather in the rafters. The scent of pine resin lingers in the air. And the fire, oh the fire, glows with a warmth deeper than its own heat. It glows with the echo of voices, the murmur of generations, the breath of old gods who once listened from the far side of the flames. The villagers who lived here, centuries ago, believed the hearth was a threshold, a boundary between the living world and the realm of spirits, a place where warmth gathered not only around bodies but around stories, where each crackle of the wood became a word, and each rising spark became a prayer carried upward to the waiting dark. Before Christianity spread its gentle shadow across the countryside, families told tales of protective spirits who watched over the home through the longest winter nights. Spirits not feared, but honored. Givers of warmth, guardians against unseen forces lurking beyond the tree line. Their names were quiet, their presence soft, their blessings subtle. It was said that if the fire was tended with care, if the embers were coaxed patiently through the night, those spirits would keep hunger, cold, and misfortune at bay. Children learned these tales curled in blankets, gazing into the heart of the fire as though it were an ancient storyteller. Grandmothers spoke them in low, melodic tones, their voices blending with the soft pop of burning sap. The children listened, wide-eyed, believing that the sparks rising toward the rafters were messages, tiny glowing messengers carrying thanks to the unseen watchers above. Some stories told of a figure with hands of ash who walked the rooftops searching for homes where the flame had been neglected. Others described a pale woman clothed in frost who appeared at windows when the fire burned too low. Still others spoke of kindly old spirits who warmed themselves by the hearth when families slept, leaving behind faint footprints of soot by morning. None of these tales were written in books. They lived in breath, in gesture, in the soft cadence of winter nights. As the centuries turned and Christianity took root, new traditions grew alongside the old. The church bells rang across the valley, their sounds weaving through the hills like ribbons of faith. But within homes, especially those tucked into the folds of remote forests, the two worlds did not collide, they intertwined. A family might attend a midnight mass during the winter feast, singing hymns of birth and renewal. Yet, upon returning home, they would place a small log upon the hearth and whisper a blessing for the old spirits. In case they still listen, as the grandmothers like to say, a child might recite a Christian prayer beneath the eaves, then toss a pinch of salt into the fire to honor whatever lingered unseen. It was a coexistence shaped not by conflict, but by comfort. The old gods did not demand devotion. They asked only to be remembered. Tonight, as you sit beside the fire in the ancient cottage, you feel the weight of these layered traditions. The flames rise and fall in gentle waves. Embers glow like tiny red suns, their heat pulsing softly. Sparks drift upward, disappearing into the dark rafters with the grace of dreams dissolving into sleep. The walls of the cottage shift in the flickering light, revealing tapestries of shadow and memory. You may imagine the grandmother seated near the hearth, weaving tales with hands roughened by winters. The children curled together on the floor, listening with breath held. The father adding a fresh log with quiet respect, careful not to disturb the rhythm of the flames. In forgotten corners of the earth, winter was once a time when the boundary between worlds thinned, when the dead were closer, when the old gods, never fully banished, leaned in to listen to the stories told around the fire. It is said that the hearth acted as a doorway, its warmth guiding ancestors home, its glow signaling safety and belonging. The Christian world embraced the winter season too, embedding it with symbols of divine birth and hope. But for many families, the two beliefs lay side by side like twin embers, each glowing quietly, neither demanding the other's extinction. Here, in this cottage, on this night, the fire holds both histories. You watch as flames dance along the logs. They twist in patterns that resemble runes, or perhaps the branches of a winter tree. The fire is alive, breathing, whispering. Each movement seems deliberate. Each spark seems to rise with purpose. In the glow, the stories unfold. You see a young mother telling her child that the fire must never be allowed to die before dawn. For the spirit of warmth walks the village each winter night, searching for homes whose flames have faltered. If it finds none, it moves on. But if it finds a hearth glowing steadily, it settles there, blessing the family with a gentle winter. You see an elderly man recalling the old feast of midwinter, when villagers gathered around bonfires in the fields. They would toss evergreen boughs into the flames, believing their scent carried messages upward. Some messages were pleas for protection. Others were expressions of gratitude for surviving the cold thus far. All were warmed by the fire before rising into the night. You see children setting out small offerings. A crust of bread placed near the hearthstone. A sprig of holly resting at the edge of the fire guard. Tokens for the old gods, tokens of remembrance. The stories change with each generation, but the essence remains. The hearth is not merely a source of heat. It is a vessel of memory, a shrine built of flame. The fire crackles, sending a bright spray of sparks upward. They flicker like tiny celestial bodies, star-marked messengers echoing ancient gratitude. The rafters catch their glow, then darken again as the sparks fade. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth drift across your skin. Outside, the snow continues to fall softly, wrapping the world in stillness. The wind hums against the cottage walls, but the hearth holds firm, a quiet guardian at the center of everything. Some believe that the old gods still listen in places like this, even now, not to prayers spoken aloud, but to the warmth itself, to the way a log is placed gently onto the fire, to the way a family gathers in its glow, to the way stories soften the edges of winter. They listen to the reverence. They listen to the memory. They listen to the silence between words. The night stretches on. The flames begin to settle, sinking slowly into deep orange embers. The cottage grows darker, the corners deepening into shadow. The grandmother's voice fades from memory. The children's faces dissolve into decades long gone. Yet the hearth remains, holding within it the faint pulse of the old god's presence. You watch the final sparks rise, slow, hesitant, golden. They drift upward like prayers seeking a place to rest. They vanish into the dim rafters, leaving behind only the soft glow of coals. As the hearth cools, the room grows hushed. The fire becomes whisper instead of voice, ember instead of flame, memory instead of story. But nothing is truly gone. Deep within the ashes, a faint warmth lingers, a quiet, glowing ember refusing to darken completely. It holds the stories, the rituals, the unspoken names of gods who once walked among humans, not in form, but in presence. Perhaps they never left. Perhaps they simply grew quiet, waiting for someone to remember their warmth. The ember pulses once more, soft as a heartbeat. You feel a hush settle over the cottage, a silence deeper than the winter night itself. Not an emptiness, but a fullness, a presence, as though an unseen listener acknowledges the tales that have just passed through the room. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. Some gods only glow when someone sits beside the fire. The ember dims. The cottage sighs. The night folds gently around you. And in the last quiet breath of warmth, you understand. Some deities do not disappear. They simply grow quiet, waiting for someone to remember their names. It is said that every village, no matter how small or forgotten, carries at least one place its people refuse to trespass after dusk. A hollow in the hills, a pond where the moon's reflection wavers strangely, a grove where the wind never seems to enter. And in one such village, embedded deep within a medieval winter, wrapped in silence and snow, that forbidden place was a wooden gate. It stood at the very edge of the forest, half swallowed by frost and shadow. No path led to it purposefully, yet every child could point the way. It rose from the earth like something grown rather than built, its planks darkened by centuries of breathless winters. Thick roots curled around its base. Moss clung to its edges. Snow gathered along its top beam, as though the sky itself wished to keep it closed. A question opens our tale, soft but lingering. What lay beyond the wooden gate? Villages refused to open during the darkest nights of winter. No one in living memory had passed through it. No one had dared touch its heavy latch when cold deepened and the nights grew long. And yet the gate remained, neither abandoned nor acknowledged, waiting like a remnant from a story no longer told. Tonight, in the silver hush of moonlight, we walk toward it. The forest breathes around you, slow, ancient, patient. Frost clings to the branches overhead, each one glittering like a shard of glass suspended in the cold air. The snow beneath your steps is thick and unmarked, save for the faintest wind-scattered ridges. You move as though walking through a dream, where sound is softened and the world moves at a gentler pace. Whispers tell us that this woodland was once considered sacred. Long before the church bells claimed the winter season, villagers came to its heart during midwinter to honor the turning of time. They carried offerings, grain for the earth that slept beneath the snow, candles to welcome the returning light, songs to remind the darkness that it was not feared but respected. But when newer traditions rose, the villagers began closing their doors against the cold instead. The forest became a boundary, a mystery too deep for ordinary nights. And the gate, carved long ago to mark the threshold between the known and the nameless, was sealed in silence. You approach it now, lantern in hand. The wood is rough beneath the frost, its grain twisting like veins of a great sleeping creature. The latch is coated in ice, yet beneath that frozen layer, it gleams faintly, as though it retains some memory of warmth. And carved into the surface of the gate, illuminated by the lantern's trembling glow, are symbols softened by centuries. Spirals, stars, rings. runes whose edges have rounded into gentle curves. The meaning has faded with time, but the feeling they evoke remains. Some are celestial, pointing toward the winter sky. Others feel rooted, earthy, tied to cycles older than names. All of them seem touched by a presence that once breathed through these woods. Beneath the silence, a deeper quiet waits. You take a step back, letting your eyes follow the gate's outline. Beyond it, between the narrow cracks in its frame, lies only darkness. But it is not an empty darkness. It is a darkness that feels held, contained. A darkness that seems to listen. Villagers told stories, rarely aloud, more often in low whispers exchanged by hearthlight, about what lay beyond this barrier. Some said a clearing where time slowed, where snow melted even in deepest winter. Others said the spirits of ancient guardians lingered there, neither benevolent nor cruel, but present, watching, waiting, remembering. Still others believed that during midwinter, when the moon was full and the world grew soft with frost, the clearing became a meeting place between realms. A moment when breath and shadow braided together, when the living could feel the brush of something older than themselves. But no one dared test these stories, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of reverence, perhaps because some mysteries find their strength in remaining untouched. You lower the lantern slightly, letting its light pool at your feet. The snow glows faintly in the reflected warmth. Around you, the forest holds its breath. The air is cold enough to make your thoughts slow, deliberate. The gate looms quietly, neither inviting nor forbidding. Only present. Time seems to gather here, thick as the frost on the branches. In medieval records, the gate is mentioned only once. A single sentence, tucked into the margin of a monk's ledger, as if the scribe hesitated to give it life in ink. There is a border we do not cross, marked by the moon and guarded by the trees. Nothing more is written. No explanation, no detail. Only the acknowledgement that the gate existed, and that it was not meant to be opened lightly. This hesitation speaks more loudly than a description ever could. For what scribe, tasked with preserving the truth as he knew it, takes the time to mention a gate, only to refuse to speak further? What truth was too fragile to record? What memory too sacred or too dangerous to commit to parchment? Legend suggests that during the oldest winters, before villages had names, there were ceremonies held at the gate. Offerings placed just beneath the latch. Candles lit in reverence, the flames flickering beneath the cold sky. Songs whispered, not sung, drifting over the snow like breath. The purpose of these acts has been lost, but their shapes remain in collective memory, like footprints half buried beneath fresh snowfall. It is said the forest listened then. Perhaps it still does. You shift slightly, feeling the forest's gaze upon you, not a gaze of eyes, but of presence. The trees stand tall around you, their silhouettes long and angular in the moonlight. Branches creak softly in the cold. Snow drifts from their limbs with the sound of a slow exhale. Everything feels suspended. You lean closer, studying the spirals carved into the wood. Their curves resemble the shapes of ancient constellations, the paths stars take across the winter sky. You trace one of them lightly with a gloved finger, and though the frost numbs your touch, something tingles beneath your skin. A memory that is not yours. Perhaps these symbols once marked a way through the darkness. A way to understand winter, not as an ending, but as a beginning. Or perhaps they were warnings. or invitations. The truth feels just out of reach, like the final thought before sleep. The lantern's flame flickers in the wind, casting shifting shadows across the gate. In those shadows, the carvings appear to move, spirals deepening, stars turning, runes opening like petals to the night. You blink, and they return to stillness. But something inside you has changed. You feel the weight of the centuries, not in the gate itself, but in what it represents. A threshold, a question, a remembrance. The villagers refused to open it, not because they feared what lay beyond, but because they honored it. The unknown can be frightening, but reverence is different. Reverence comes from the recognition that some places hold a deeper silence, a silence that is not meant to be broken. The gate, in its quiet presence, teaches this truth. You lift the lantern again. Its flame is smaller now, its warmth softer. The forest seems to pull back slightly, making space around you. Snow falls in gentle flakes, drifting downward like pale feathers. They settle upon your cloak, upon the gate, upon the frozen ground. In this moment, the world feels balanced, held between fear and reverence, between the known and the unknown, between the story you have been told and the story waiting just beyond the wooden frame. You place a hand on the gate, not to open it, but simply to acknowledge it. The wood is cold, but beneath the cold you sense depth, age, silence shaped into form. The lantern dims again. Moonlight settles on the symbols, highlighting them in silver. And then, very slowly, you step back. The gate remains unopened. You turn away, moving through the snow with quiet steps. The forest resumes its breath. The wind stirs faintly, brushing past your cheek, like a memory drifting through time. And the gate, steadfast, patient, watches your departure. As you leave the edge of the forest, the moon shines down upon the gate one last time, illuminating it in a soft, otherworldly glow. The spirals gleam faintly. The stars carve into the wood, shimmer like frost. And the runes, ancient, faded, seem to whisper something too light, too fragile to be understood. Perhaps it was never meant to be. Some mysteries are not doors, they are mirrors. And some gates are meant not to be crossed, but simply witnessed from afar. The lantern extinguishes. The forest closes behind you, and the winter gate waits, silent, sacred, eternal, for the next traveler to wonder what lies beyond. It is said that there was once a night in winter when the world held its breath a little longer than usual. A night when the darkness did not press, but listened. When the sky seemed to lean closer to the earth, as if waiting for something soft and sacred to be spoken into it. On that night, in a stone church at the edge of a sleeping village, a quiet miracle of sound began to rise. The church itself was small, almost modest. Its walls were thick, built to keep out the gnawing cold of the season, and its windows were tall but narrow, filled with glass clouded by age. Snow pressed against the outer sills. The wind moved around the building in slow, circling motions, trailing whispers along the rough stone. Inside, only a handful of candles burned. Their flames trembled slightly, casting amber light into the shadows of the nave. Wooden pews sat empty, their surfaces polished by centuries of hands and prayers. The altar waited beneath a single iron cross, its edges softened by the glow. And in that quiet from somewhere near the front of the church, the soft hum of voices began to rise. They did not start all at once. One voice emerged first, low, steady, like a single thread stretched through the air. Then another joined it, then another. until the hum thickened into harmony, into something that felt older than the words it carried. It did not call to the congregation because there was no congregation here tonight. The doors were locked, the benches empty. This choir, known only through a faded parish note in the margin of an old ledger, sang once a year at the height of winter, offering melodies meant not for human ears, but for the night itself. Whispers tell us they sang for the longest night of all, a night when the sun's absence felt especially heavy, when warmth seemed more memory than promise. They sang not to drive the darkness away, but to keep it company, to acknowledge its depth, its ancient patience, its role in the turning of the year. Their harmonies drifted upward like incense, curling toward the vaulted ceiling, weaving between the stone ribs of the arches. The sound filled every hollow of the church, but never once broke its stillness. Instead, it seemed to deepen it, like ink sinking into parchment. The music they sang was unlike the hymns heard on holy days. It was a careful braid. Fragments of plainchant flowed through the melody, long gentle lines that rose and fell like breath. These were the familiar sounds of the church, rooted in Latin syllables that had echoed across countless chapels and monasteries. But intertwined with them, subtle, almost hidden, were older tunes. Folk songs remembered only by the elders. Lullabies once sung beside hearths. Midwinter refrains passed from grandmother to child in homes where snowbursts rattled the shutters. Those older tunes did not speak of saints or angels, but of stars and fields and the spirits of the cold. They carried the memory of bonfires in the dark countryside, of evergreen boughs hung in quiet gratitude, of humble offerings left where roads met forests. The choir, gathered here in dim light, knew both lineages of song by heart. Their preparation began long before the night arrived. In the weeks leading up to the longest night, there were no public rehearsals, no posted announcements nailed to the church door. Instead, the singers slipped in at twilight, after the last parishioner had left and the echoes of daytime prayer had faded into the walls. They moved through the aisles in silence, their footsteps muffled by worn stone and layers of invisible dust. They did not speak much. They did not need to. In the front pew, an aging cantor would unfurl a scrap of parchment, its corners curled and edges darkened by years of handling. On it, notes were written in careful script, but between the lines lay faint markings, small shorthand symbols and phrases in the local tongue, reminders of melodies too delicate to pin down entirely. This part, the cantor would murmur softly, pointing to a passage of chant, must fold into the other tune, like hands joining. And so they practiced that joining. Plain chant lines stretched across the space, solemn measured, steady as the slow march of clouds across a winter sky. Then, beneath those lines, a second melody would appear, lighter, like a memory surfacing from deep water. It carried hints of village song, the kind once sung in fields after harvest, when the first frost kissed the ground. The choir learned when to let one tradition rise above the other, and when to let them blend so completely that they became indistinguishable. Christian and elder, church and cottage, altar and hearth, held together in harmony. In forgotten corners of the earth, faith is not always a matter of choosing one song over another. Sometimes it is a weaving of many songs into a single, shared breath. The choir understood this. They carried it in their voices, As the longest night drew near, the final preparations were made. A handful of candles was set aside, carefully cut and trimmed so they would burn through most of the night without sputtering. Thick cloaks were draped over the backs of pews for the singers to wrap around themselves between songs. A small brazier, more symbolic than effective, was placed near the front to hold embers that glowed like quiet hearts in the dark. And then, when the sun slipped behind the horizon and stayed there longer than any other evening, they gathered. Outside, the village settled into sleep. Fires dimmed, doors latched. Wind pressed against the eaves, checking whether there were any cracks left unsealed. Snow fell in a slow, unhurried dance, blanketing the world in softness. Inside, the choir took their places. The first note was barely more than a murmur, a humming sound that seemed to rise from the stone itself. It vibrated gently through the floorboards, up the wooden pews into the rafters, and then outward into the night beyond the walls. Plancient emerged, the Latin syllables smoothed by years of repetition. They spoke of light and hope, of divine presence in the heart of darkness. They move with the unhurried pace of a procession, each phrase leaving room for silence to follow. Then, as the chant held a steady line, an older melody curled around it. A folk tune that spoke of winter fields resting under snow, of rivers slowed to glass, of unseen guardians pacing the boundaries of the village. The words were simple, the kind sung by ordinary people in ordinary homes. But here, in this church, they took on a new life. The night listened. It is said that in certain moments, when the harmonies aligned just so, the air itself seemed to shiver, not from cold, but from recognition, as though something in the darkness remembered being honored this way. Long before the first stone of the church was ever laid, the singer did not think of themselves as extraordinary. They were bakers, weavers, widows, apprentices. But on this night, in this place, they became a bridge, a living span between forgotten winters and the ones unfolding around them. Their voices carried memories they did not fully understand. A verse would rise, and with it, the echo of a bonfire from centuries earlier. A refrain would fall, and with it, the image of a child listening by a snow-lit window. A single held note would tremble, and with it, the ghost of a ritual once performed under star-crowded skies. Beneath the silence of the congregation that wasn't there, the night filled every empty space. The choir sang to it as one might sing to an old friend or a distant ancestor. There was respect in their tone, and affection, and a tiny spark of fear, because to sing to the night is to admit that it is vast and that we are small within it. Yet they sang anyway. Through the darkest hours, their songs rose and fell. Some were barely more than breath shaped into melody. Others filled the nave so fully that the candles seemed to bend inward, listening. There were times when the singers' eyes closed, and they swayed slightly as if carried along by a current of their own sound. And always, always, their voices reached upward, like smoke, like prayer, like a ladder built of notes instead of wood. In a faded parish note, scribbled in the margin of an account book, tracking candles and oil, a priest once wrote of them. They sing on the longest night not for us, but for what surrounds us. I do not know who hears, but I feel the listening. That listening, more than anything, defined the choir's purpose. They were not there to perform. They were there to answer, to respond to the vast quiet that settles over the world when light withdraws. As the long night crept toward its slow turning, The choir's voices began to soften. Their melodies shortened, becoming more like lullabies than litanies. The folk tunes faded first, their last phrases lingering like breath on cold glass. The plain chant remained a little longer, its lines stretching toward the faint promise of dawn. Then came the final song. No parchment carried its notes, no ledger named it. It changed a little each year, shaped by the voices present and the winters they had known. But its heart was always the same, a gentle acknowledgement of darkness and a tender hope for light. The choir sang it slowly, each singer carrying their part like a small flame cupped in two hands. The final tone hung in the air, fragile and pure. It hovered beneath the stone arches, drifted along the pews, brushed against the flickering candles, and then dissolved. Silence followed, not an empty silence, but a full one. A silence that seemed to glow, a silence that felt as though the night itself were holding its breath in gratitude. One by one, the singers lowered their heads. The candles burned low. The bracier's embers dimmed. Outside, the first indistinct grey of dawn began to gather beyond the horizon, still distant but inevitable. The choir quietly wrapped their cloaks around their shoulders, their bodies tired but their hearts strangely light. There were no applause, no blessings, no formal dismissals. They left as they had arrived, in silence, slipping out into the cold, their footprints soft on the snow. The stone church remained behind, holding the echo of their voices in its walls, holding the songs inside its memory, the way trees hold the memory of winters in their rings. The night, having listened, released its hold. And yet, as the years turned and the choir vanished into history, its existence trapped only in the faded handwriting of that parish note, the feeling of their song lingered. On certain winter evenings, when the wind moves just so through the cracks in old stone and candles burn lower than expected, some say they hear it still, a faint hum beneath the surface of silence, not loud enough to disturb, only enough to remind, as though the longest night still waits, somewhere deep in time, to hear that sacred song again. Perhaps it was never meant to be captured in notes or words. Perhaps it was meant only to be sung once each year, then allowed to fade into darkness. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And on the longest night of winter, if you find yourself in a quiet place, beneath stone or sky, with a single candle burning and the world wrapped in sleep, you might pause, just long enough to feel it, that tranquil ache, that soft memory of a choir who sang not to be heard, but simply to answer the waiting night. It is said that in certain forgotten fields, those untouched by plough or prayer, those left to the quiet guidance of wind and frost, there are stones that remember what people have long forgotten. Stones that stand not as markers of graves or borders, but as witnesses, silent keepers of cycles older than any church calendar, older than parchment, older than the languages once whispered across the land. Our journey begins in one such field. A deserted meadow stretches beneath the grey hush of a winter sky. The grass, long frozen, bows beneath the weight of frost. The air is crisp enough to hold sound still, as though everything here breathes in slow, measured rhythms. And at the center of this meadow, tilted slightly, half buried in the earth, stands a solitary stone. Its surface is pale beneath the snow, the lines of its carving softened by centuries of wind. Yet even from a distance, the stone seems to hold presence. Not grandeur, not threat. simply presence, as though it has been waiting patiently, marked by the moon, for this moment of being seen again. You step closer, lantern in hand. The stone is colder than the surrounding earth, as if it draws winter into itself. Frost clings to the carved grooves along its face. Circles fade into spirals. Spirals blur into crescents. Crescents disappear into symbols that seem almost oceanic. Curves like waves, dots like stars drifting in deepest night. Local lore insists the stone once played a role in ancient midwinter ceremonies. Elders speak of it quietly over hearthfires, their voices softening when they recall stories handed down through generations. They say the stone measured the sun's return, its slow climb from the horizon after the longest night. They claim its carving shimmered faintly on certain evenings, catching the last light of a dying sun and sending it along grooves carved with intentional grace. Some believe the stone was a calendar. Others believed it was a gateway, a threshold through which offerings passed into unseen hands. No one living knows for certain. But standing here now, beneath the muted winter sky, you understand why people were drawn to it. There was something watchful about it, something patient, something that hums faintly beneath the silence. You kneel, clearing a patch of snow from its surface. Your gloved fingers trace the carvings, spirals that feel almost familiar. Crescents tilted toward the sky as though pointing to unseen cycles. The grooves are shallow but precise. Time has blurred them, but not erased them. They carry the weight of human touch, of careful hands pressing stone against stone in a ritual act. Whispers tell us that long before medieval villagers built their wooden homes nearby, their ancestors gathered here during midwinter. They stood in cloaks of wool, faces hidden beneath hoods, their breath rising in white ribbons. The stone served as their guide. When the sun dipped lowest, when shadows stretched longest, they watched the light move across its carvings, marking the moment when darkness began to loosen its grasp. Some rituals called for offerings. Grain placed in the hollow at the stone's base. Twigs of evergreen symbolizing endurance. Small tokens carved from bone or wood representing gratitude for survival. Others called for silence, deep, reverent silence. Villagers would stand around the stone, forming a circle, each person honoring the turning of time through breath alone. The silence itself became a kind of offering, a recognition that winter could not be rushed, but must be welcomed and respected. As Christianity spread through the region, many of these customs slipped quietly beneath its new rituals, but they never vanished completely. Medieval villagers, though they knelt in churches and kept feast days by candlelight, still carried older instincts in their bones. On the coldest nights, when the frost crept through their shutters and darkness pressed close to their windows, some felt drawn to the meadow, drawn not by fear, but by memory. Memory of a stone that had watched countless winters. Memory of ceremonies performed by ancestors whose names the snow had buried. Memory of a cycle older than scripture, older than the village, older than the faith they practiced. The stone became a bridge between what was remembered and what was forgotten. Tonight, as you stand before it, you feel that same bridge beneath your feet. Lantern light spills softly across the stone's face, illuminating the carvings in warm gold. The spirals seem to deepen, the crescents sharpen. For just a moment, the symbols appear almost legible, saying something through shape and silence. Perhaps they mark the sun's slow rebirth. Perhaps they capture the arc of constellations. Perhaps they simply mirror the motion of breath, the inhale and exhale of the world as it turns. There is something soothing in the not knowing, something tender in the mystery. As the lantern flickers, your eyes drift to the base of the stone. The earth here is slightly raised, forming a small mound. Snow has gathered on it unevenly, creating tiny waves of white. Some believe this mound once held offerings, buried over time. Others say it hides a second stone, another piece of the ancient calendar lost beneath centuries of winter. Whether true or not, the mound feels purposeful, like a pause in the earth, a breath held in anticipation. Medieval writings rarely mention this stone. In one surviving parchment, a record from a nearby monastery, the meadow is described briefly as a place of old customs. But the scribe's tone carries hesitation, as though acknowledging the stone risked lending legitimacy to practices the church wished to soften, not celebrate. And yet the stone endured. Not because the villagers depended on it, but because they respected it. It belonged to the land. It belonged to the winter. It belonged to something deeper than daily life. Some villagers believed the stone predicted winter's return, not through magic, but through its reminder, through its enduring presence, through its calm acceptance of the cold. Every year, winter returns, they would say, and every year the stone remains. Its carvings more quiet, its message more veiled, yet still holding its place in the cycle. You rise slowly, letting the lantern's light drift across the meadow. The snow reflects faint glimmers, like a scattering of stars fallen to earth. A soft wind settles over the field, brushing against your cloak. The stone stands behind you, half shrouded in frost, its presence both humble and monumental. Perhaps the villagers once stood exactly where you stand now, feeling the same quiet awe. Perhaps they whispered questions to the stone, questions about the turning of seasons, the return of warmth, the fate of their harvests. Perhaps the stone, in its deep silence, offered them comfort simply by being steadfast. There is a lesson buried here, beneath the frost. Cycles continue. Darkness deepens, then retreats. Light disappears, then returns. Winter is not an ending, but part of a longer rhythm. The stone remembers this, and in moments like this one, it helps you remember too. A soft flurry begins to drift from the sky, snowflakes spiraling downward in slow, graceful patterns. They gather on your shoulders, on the grass, on the stone. The carvings darken for a moment beneath the melting flakes, becoming more visible. Then soften once more as the frost settles in. The stone seems to exhale, to rest, to welcome the snow as the old companion. With each falling flake, the symbols fade gently into whiteness. Spirals blur, crescents dissolve. The engraved lines surrender to the winter's embrace. Soon the stone will be nearly invisible again, hidden beneath its blanket until someone else seeks it. You lower the lantern, letting its glow diminish. The meadow dims. The stone becomes a pale outline against the gathering dusk, and in this quiet retreat of light, a final truth settles like snow. Some mysteries endure, not because they are solved, but because they are allowed to rest. And some relics do not reveal their meaning through understanding, but through presence. The snow thickens, drifting over the stone, covering its secrets with gentle patience. It lets the carving sleep. It mutes the echoes of rituals once performed here. It returns the stone to silence. As you turn to leave, you glance back once more. The stone stands half veiled, half revealed, exactly as it has for generations. a keeper of cycles, a listener in the frost, a quiet reminder of winter's eternal rhythm. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps its wisdom rests not in revelation, but in endurance. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them, and some stones speak only in silence. The snow continues to fall, and the carved stone returns to its long, patient sleep beneath the winter sky. It is said that in certain winters, those heavy with silence, those laced with long nights that seemed to steal the edges of the world, there were halls where a single flame burned for someone who was not there. A flame lit not for ceremony, nor for ritual, nor even for God alone, but for absence, for longing, for the fragile hope that the missing might still find their way back through snow and shadow. Our story begins in such a hall. The door groans open beneath your hand, stirring a swirl of cold air into the dim interior. Dust hangs in the silence like a veil. Stone arches rise above you, their shadows softened by the weak glow of a candle set upon a long wooden table near the far wall. Its flame trembles as though startled by your arrival. The wick glows red at the base, the wax pooling slowly around it, pale as moon-washed bone. This abandoned hall once held gatherings, winter feasts, village meetings, the soft murmur of prayer. But now, in the depth of night, it holds only this candle, only this warmth, only this memory. And tonight, we follow that memory into the past. It is said that the tradition of lighting a flame for the absent was older than the village itself, older than the walls that now stand in ruin around the candle. Some believe it began before the church claimed winter, when families turned to simpler gods, spirits of hearth and woodland, guardians of warmth, watchers of travelers lost to storms. In those days, when snowstorms swept across the valley without warning and the nights grew long enough to blur into each other, those who waited at home lit candles not out of ritual obligation, but out of survival. The world was vast, the cold was merciless, and journeys, whether to hunt, to trade, or to visit distant kin, did not always end as promised. So a flame was lit, for safety, for guidance, for remembrance. Whispers tell us that in some homes, the candle was placed in the highest window, where it flickered like a star. In others, it burned at the hearth, where spirits of warmth were said to gather. Yet in many places, especially in communal halls like this one, the candle was placed at the center of the room, where everyone could see it, and where its glow touched every shadow. It was not a ritual dictated by priests or scribes. It grew from human hearts, soft, trembling, vulnerable. Tonight, you feel the echo of those hearts as the candle flickers in its lonely pool of light. Centuries ago, this hall would have been full. Families wrapped in cloaks and woolen scarves would have stepped inside, shaking snow from their boots. Children would have clung to their mothers' hands, their eyes wide with the quiet solemnity of the tradition. An elder, perhaps a grandmother with silver blue eyes, or a patriarch with a voice deep as winter earth, would bring the candle to the center of the room. The flame would already be lit when the families arrived. It always began with silence. Not a forced silence, but a gathering one. A silence that settled gently, like snow on rooftops, softening every edge. The children would quiet. The adults would bow their heads. And in the glow of the candle, the names would be spoken, one by one, softly, tenderly. Names of those who had not come home. A father delayed by winter-thick roads. A son hunting in the forest, who had not returned at dusk, a daughter who journeyed to a neighboring village, a brother or sister caught in a snowstorm. In medieval winters, absence carried a weight far heavier than it does now. Roads vanished under drifts, rivers froze, wolves prowled, lanterns blew out in sudden winds. And so, the candle burned for them, a beacon, a promise, a wish turned into light. The flame in front of you bends as a stray draft slips through a crack in the stone. Shadows stretch softly across the wall behind it, shifting shapes like silent memories returning to the surface. Villagers once believed that shadows cast by a candle held meaning, that the flicker of darkness on the stone might reveal a soul's journey, whether it was close or far, whether it wandered or rested. When shadows stretched long and smooth, families took comfort. They are still on their path, they would whisper. If the shadow trembled or broke, fear crept quietly into the room. But the candle remained lit all the same. Whatever its shadow revealed, the flame endured. Some nights, the family stayed for hours. They spoke softly of their absent loved ones, of stories from childhood, of shared harvests, of laughter beside streams in warmer seasons. Such stories were not meant to ease fear, but to keep memory warm. Memory, after all, was another kind of flame. As Christianity spread over the countryside, the meaning of the candle began to shift. Churches encouraged prayers for travelers, for the lost, for the departed. Candles were lit on altars, scented with resin or beeswax, their flames rising beside carved icons and painted saints. And yet the older tradition did not vanish. It adapted, it merged. The candle became part prayer, part wish, part ancestral remembrance. It burned not only for absent travelers, but for those who had passed beyond the reach of the living. Some nights, a villager would light a flame for a relative lost to illness years before, whispering a name that no longer echoed in daily speech. Others lit candles for those who had been forgotten by everyone else. One winter record speaks of a widow who lit a flame in this very hall for a husband lost to war 50 years earlier. No one questioned her. The ritual embraced both past and present, both grief and hope. It became a bridge between worlds. As you stand here now, the hall feels thick with echoes. The air holds a faint scent of old wax and cold stone. Footsteps long vanished seem to stir beneath the floorboards. And the candle, small, fragile, burns with quiet dignity. You watch its flame rise and fall. Its glow pulls gently on the table's wood, highlighting scratches made by knives and bowls from forgotten feasts. It climbs the wall in a wavering arc. It reflects faintly in the frost gathering along the window's edge. Some believe that when a candle is lit for the absent, the light carries a message. That somewhere, across snow-covered plains or beneath a canopy of winter branches, the one who is missed might feel a sudden warmth upon the cheek, a softness in the air, a tug on the heart, an invisible thread pulling them home. Whether true or not, the belief gave comfort. And comfort in the deep of winter is a kind of survival. The narrative shifts now into the deep interior of memory, the place where ritual and emotion entwine. Imagine a mother in a medieval cottage, her hair braided and tucked beneath a woolen hood. She lights a candle on the windowsill, her fingers trembling not from cold, but from hope. Her daughter left to visit kin days earlier, and snow has fallen since. The candle's flame reflects in the glass, doubling its light. "I will guide you home," she whispers. Imagine a young man setting a candle by the hearth, recalling his brother who left to trade in a distant town. He cannot know if his brother still walks the roads or if winter claimed him. But the flame gives him something to hold, something to wait with. Imagine an elder lighting two flames, one for a daughter, one for a son. Both gone, both missed. The light trembles upon her wrinkled hands, but she lights them anyway. The candle becomes a promise, a vigil, a prayer in its simplest form. Return, if you can. Rest, if you cannot. The flame before you has grown smaller. Wax gathers around its base in delicate curves, cooling into fragile shapes that resemble petals or ripples frozen in time. Shadows deepen in the corners of the hall. The air grows colder. As the wick shortens, the flame softens, its golden glow withdrawing into itself like a sigh. While it burns, you feel them, those whose names once filled this space. The memories hover like dust suspended in light. Their footsteps echo faintly along the stone floor. Not ghosts, but impressions. Not presences, but warmth. The candle begins to dim. Its final minutes are tender, almost hesitant. It seems to resist fading, as though its small flame aches to stay awake a little longer, to guide one more soul through the dark. But the night has its own rhythm. Slowly, gently, the flame bends. It flickers. It climbs. It sinks. And then, quietly, it goes out. A faint curl of smoke rises, forming a spiral that dissolves into the cold air. The hall, now dark, feels larger, sadder, softer. But the warmth remains, not in the air, but in the memory of the flame. In the tender truth that love once lit candles for the absent, not knowing whether they would return, but lighting them regardless. Perhaps that is the heart of every winter ritual, to keep light alive even when we cannot see who it reaches. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some flames do not vanish when they die, they linger where the heart makes room for them. Tonight, as the hall sinks back into its long sleep, the wick cools, the shadows deepen, and the world grows still. But the warmth of the candle that was lit for the absent remains.